Short Stories by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Chapter 1. An Honest Thief. One morning, just as I was about to set off to my office, Agrafena, my cook, washerwoman, and housekeeper, came in to me, and, to my surprise, entered into conversation. She had always been such a silent, simple creature, that, except her daily inquiry about dinner, she had not uttered a word for the last 6 years. I, at least, had heard nothing else from her. "Here I have come in to have a word with you, sir," she began abruptly. "You really ought to let the little room." "Which little room?" "Why, the one next the kitchen, to be sure." "What for?" "What for? Why, because folks do take in lodgers, to be sure." "But who would take it?" "Who would take it? Why, a lodger would take it, to be sure." "But, my good woman, one could not put a bedstead in it. There wouldn't be room to move. Who could live in it?" "Who wants to live there? As long as he has a place to sleep in, why, he would live in the window." "In what window?" "In what window? As though you didn't know. The one in the passage, to be sure. He would sit there, sewing, or doing anything else. Maybe he would sit on a chair, too. He's got a chair, and he has a table, too. He's got everything." "Who is he, then?" "Oh, a good man, a man of experience. I will cook for him, and I'll ask him 3 roubles a month for his board and lodging." After prolonged efforts I succeeded at last in learning from Agrafena that an elderly man had somehow managed to persuade her to admit him into the kitchen as a lodger and boarder. Any notion Agrafena took into her head had to be carried out. If not, I knew she would give me no peace. When anything was not to her liking, she at once began to brood, and sank into a deep dejection that would last for a fortnight or 3 weeks. During that period my dinners were spoiled, my linen was mislaid, my floors went unscrubbed. In short, I had a great deal to put up with. I had observed long ago that this inarticulate woman was incapable of conceiving a project, of originating an idea of her own. But if anything like a notion or a project was by some means put into her feeble brain, to prevent its being carried out meant, for a time, her moral assassination. And so, as I cared more for my peace of mind than for anything else, I consented forthwith. "He has a passport, anyway, or something of the sort?" "To be sure he has. He is a good man, a man of experience. 3 roubles he's promised to pay." The very next day the new lodger made his appearance in my modest bachelor quarters. But I was not put out by this. Indeed, I was inwardly pleased. I lead, as a rule, a very lonely hermit's existence. I have scarcely any friends. I hardly ever go anywhere. As I had spent 10 years never coming out of my shell, I had, of course, grown used to solitude. But another 10 or 15 years or more of the same solitary existence, with the same Agrafena, in the same bachelor quarters, was in truth a somewhat cheerless prospect. And therefore a new inmate, if well behaved, was a heaven-sent blessing. Agrafena had spoken truly. My lodger was certainly a man of experience. From his passport it appeared that he was an old soldier, a fact which I should have known indeed from his face. An old soldier is easily recognized. Astafy Ivanovitch was a favorable specimen of his class. We got on very well together. What was best of all, Astafy Ivanovitch would sometimes tell a story, describing some incident in his own life. In the perpetual boredom of my existence, such a storyteller was a veritable treasure. One day he told me one of these stories. It made an impression on me. The following event was what led to it. I was left alone in the flat. Both Astafy and Agrafena were out on business of their own. All of a sudden I heard from the inner room somebody, I fancied a stranger, come in. I went out. There actually was a stranger in the passage, a short fellow wearing no overcoat in spite of the cold autumn weather. "What do you want?" "Does a clerk called Alexandrov live here?" "Nobody of that name here, brother. Good-bye." "Why, the dvornik told me it was here," said my visitor, cautiously retiring towards the door. Be off, brother. Get along." Next day after dinner, while Astafy Ivanovitch was fitting on a coat which he was altering for me, again some one came into the passage. I half opened the door. Before my very eyes my yesterday's visitor, with perfect composure, took my wadded greatcoat from the peg, and, stuffing it under his arm, darted out of the flat. Agrafena stood all the time staring at him, agape with astonishment, and doing nothing for the protection of my property. Astafy Ivanovitch flew in pursuit of the thief, and 10 minutes later came back out of breath and empty-handed. He had vanished completely. "Well, there's a piece of luck, Astafy Ivanovitch. It's a good job your cloak is left, or he would have put you in a plight, the thief." But the whole incident so impressed Astafy Ivanovitch that I forgot the theft as I looked at him. He could not get over it. Every minute or two he would drop the work upon which he was engaged, and would describe over again how it had all happened, how he had been standing, how the greatcoat had been taken down before his very eyes, not a yard away, and how it had come to pass that he could not catch the thief. Then he would sit down to his work again, then leave it once more, and at last I saw him go down to the dvornik to tell him all about it, and to upbraid him for letting such a thing happen in his domain. Then he came back and began scolding Agrafena. Then he sat down to his work again, and long afterwards he was still muttering to himself how it had all happened, how he stood there and I was here, how before our eyes, not a yard away, the thief took the coat off the peg, and so on. In short, though Astafy Ivanovitch understood his business, he was a terrible slow coach and busybody. "He's made fools of us, Astafy Ivanovitch," I said to him in the evening, as I gave him a glass of tea. I wanted to while away the time by recalling the story of the lost greatcoat, the frequent repetition of which, together with the great earnestness of the speaker, was beginning to become very amusing. "Fools, indeed, sir! Even though it is no business of mine, I am put out. It makes me angry, though it is not my coat that was lost. To my thinking there is no vermin in the world worse than a thief. Another takes what you can spare, but a thief steals the work of your hands, the sweat of your brow, your time. Ugh, it's nasty. One can't speak of it. It's too vexing. How is it you don't feel the loss of your property, sir?" "Yes, you are right, Astafy Ivanovitch. Better if the thing had been burnt. It's annoying to let the thief have it. It's disagreeable." "Disagreeable! I should think so. Yet, to be sure, there are thieves and thieves. And I have happened, sir, to come across an honest thief." "An honest thief? But how can a thief be honest, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "There you are right indeed, sir. How can a thief be honest? There are none such. I only meant to say that he was an honest man, sure enough, and yet he stole. I was simply sorry for him." "Why? How was that, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "It was about 2 years ago, sir. I had been nearly a year out of a place, and just before I lost my place, I made the acquaintance of a poor lost creature. We got acquainted in a public house. He was a drunkard, a vagrant, a beggar. He had been in a situation of some sort, but from his drinking habits he had lost his work. Such a ne'er-do-well. God only knows what he had on. Often you wouldn't be sure if he'd a shirt under his coat. Everything he could lay his hands upon he would drink away. But he was not one to quarrel. He was a quiet fellow, a soft, good-natured chap, and he never asked. He was ashamed, but you could see for yourself the poor fellow wanted a drink, and you would stand it to him. And so we got friendly, that's to say. He stuck to me. It was all one to me. And what a man he was, to be sure! Like a little dog he would follow me. Wherever I went, there he would be, and all that after our first meeting. And he as thin as a thread paper. At first it was, 'Let me stay the night.' Well, I let him stay. I looked at his passport too. The man was all right. Well, the next day it was the same story, and then the third day he came again, and sat all day in the window, and stayed the night. Well, thinks I, he is sticking to me. Give him food and drink and shelter at night too. Here am I, a poor man, and a hanger-on to keep as well. And before he came to me, he used to go in the same way to a government clerk's. He attached himself to him. They were always drinking together. But he, through trouble of some sort, drank himself into the grave. My man was called Emelyan Ilyitch. I pondered and pondered. What was I to do with him? To drive him away I was ashamed. I was sorry for him. Such a pitiful, God-forsaken creature I never did set eyes on. And not a word said either. He does not ask, but just sits there and looks into your eyes like a dog. To think what drinking will bring a man down to! I kept asking myself, how am I to say to him, "You must be moving, Emelianushka. There's nothing for you here. You've come to the wrong place. I shall soon not have a bite for myself. How am I to keep you too?" I sat and wondered what he'd do when I said that to him, and I seemed to see how he'd stare at me. If he were to hear me say that, how long he would sit and not understand a word of it. And when it did get home to him at last, how he would get up from the window, would take up his bundle, I can see it now, the red check handkerchief full of holes, with God knows what wrapped up in it, which he had always with him, and then how he would set his shabby old coat to rights, so that it would look decent and keep him warm, so that no holes would be seen. He was a man of delicate feelings. And how he'd open the door and go out with tears in his eyes. Well, there's no letting a man go to ruin like that. One's sorry for him. And then again, I think, how am I off myself? "Wait a bit, Emelianushka," says I to myself. "You've not long to feast with me. I shall soon be going away, and then you will not find me." Well, sir, our family made a move, and Alexander Filimonovitch, my master, now deceased, God rest his soul, said, "I am thoroughly satisfied with you, Astafy Ivanovitch. When we come back from the country, we will take you on again." I had been butler with them, a nice gentleman he was, but he died that same year. Well, after seeing him off, I took my belongings, what little money I had, and I thought I'd have a rest for a time. So I went to an old woman I knew, and I took a corner in her room. There was only one corner free in it. She had been a nurse, so now she had a pension and a room of her own. Well, now good-bye, Emelianushka, thinks I, you won't find me now, my boy. And what do you think, sir? I had gone out to see a man I knew, and when I came back in the evening, the first thing I saw was Emelianushka. There he was, sitting on my box, and his check bundle beside him. He was sitting in his ragged old coat, waiting for me, and to while away the time he had borrowed a church book from the old lady, and was holding it wrong side upwards. He'd scented me out. My heart sank. Well, thinks I, there's no help for it. Why didn't I turn him out at first? So I asked him straight off, "Have you brought your passport, Emelianushka?" I sat down on the spot, sir, and began to ponder. Will a vagabond like that be very much trouble to me? And on thinking it over, it seemed he would not be much trouble. He must be fed, I thought. Well, a bit of bread in the morning, and to make it go down better, I'll buy him an onion. At midday I shall have to give him another bit of bread and an onion, and in the evening onion again with kvass, with some more bread if he wanted it. And if some cabbage soup were to come our way, then we shall both have our fill. I am no great eater myself, and a drinking man, as we all know, never eats. All he wants is herb brandy or green vodka. He'll ruin me with his drinking, I thought. But then another idea came into my head, sir. It took great hold on me. So much so that if Emelianushka had gone away, I should have felt that I had nothing to live for, I do believe. I determined on the spot to be a father and guardian to him. I'll keep him from ruin, I thought. I'll wean him from the glass. You wait a bit, thought I. Very well. Emelianushka, you may stay, only you must behave yourself. You must obey orders. Well, thinks I to myself, I'll begin by training him to work of some sort, but not all at once. Let him enjoy himself a little first, and I'll look round and find something you are fit for, Emelianushka. For every sort of work a man needs a special ability, you know, sir. And I began to watch him on the quiet. I soon saw Emelianushka was a desperate character. I began, sir, with a word of advice. I said this and that to him. "Emelianushka," said I, "you ought to take a thought and mend your ways. Have done with drinking. Just look what rags you go about in. That old coat of yours, if I make bold to say so, is fit for nothing but a sieve. A pretty state of things. It's time to draw the line, sure enough." Emelianushka sat and listened to me, with his head hanging down. Would you believe it, sir? It had come to such a pass with him. He'd lost his tongue through drink, and could not speak a word of sense. Talk to him of cucumbers, and he'd answer back about beans. He would listen and listen to me, and then heave such a sigh. "What are you sighing for, Emelyan Ilyitch?" I asked him. "Oh, nothing. Don't you mind me, Astafy Ivanovitch. Do you know there were 2 women fighting in the street today, Astafy Ivanovitch? One upset the other woman's basket of cranberries by accident." "Well, what of that?" "And the second one upset the other's cranberries on purpose, and trampled them underfoot too." "Well?" "And what of it, Emelyan Ilyitch?" "Why, nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch. I just mentioned it." "Nothing? I just mentioned it! Emelyanushka, my boy," I thought, "you've squandered and drunk away your brains." "And do you know a gentleman dropped a money note on the pavement in Gohovy Street? No, it was Sadovy Street. And a peasant saw it and said, 'That's my luck.' And at the same time another man saw it and said, 'No, it's my bit of luck.' I saw it before you did." "Well, Emelyan Ilyitch?" "And the fellows had a fight over it, Astafy Ivanovitch. But a policeman came up, took away the note, gave it back to the gentleman, and threatened to take up both the men." "Well, but what of it? What is there edifying about it, Emelyanushka?" "Why, nothing, to be sure. Folks laughed, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Ah, Emelyanushka, what do the folks matter? You've sold your soul for a brass farthing. But do you know what I have to tell you, Emelyan Ilyitch?" "What, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "Take a job of some sort, that's what you must do. For the 100th time I say to you, set to work, have some mercy on yourself." "What could I set to do, Astafy Ivanovitch? I don't know what job I could set to, and there is no one who would take me on, Astafy Ivanovitch." "That's how you came to be turned off, Emelyanushka, you drinking man. And do you know Vlas, the waiter, was sent for the office today, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "Why did they send for him, Emelyanushka?" I asked. "I could not say why, Astafy Ivanovitch. I suppose they wanted him there, and that's why they sent for him." "Ah," thought I, "we are in a bad way, poor Emelyanushka. The Lord is chastising us for our sins. Well, sir, what is one to do with such a man? But a cunning fellow he was, and no mistake. He'd listen and listen to me. But at last I suppose he got sick of it. As soon as he sees I am beginning to get angry, he'd pick up his old coat, and out he'd slip and leave no trace. He'd wander about all day and come back at night drunk. Where he got the money from, the Lord only knows. I had no hand in that." "No," said I. "Emelyan Ilyitch, you'll come to a bad end. Give over drinking. Mind what I say now. Give it up. Next time you come home in liquor, you can spend the night on the stairs. I won't let you in." After hearing that threat, Emelyanushka sat at home that day and the next. But on the third he slipped off again. I waited and waited. He didn't come back. Well, at least I didn't mind owning I was in a fright, and I felt for the man too. What have I done to him, I thought. I've scared him away. Where's the poor fellow gone to now? He'll get lost, maybe. Lord have mercy upon us. Night came on. He did not come. In the morning I went out into the porch. I looked, and if he hadn't gone to sleep in the porch, there he was with his head on the step and chilled to the marrow of his bones. "What next, Emelyanushka? God have mercy on you! Where will you get to next?" "Why, you were sort of angry with me, Astafy Ivanovitch, the other day. You were vexed and promised to put me to sleep in the porch. So I didn't sort of venture to come in, Astafy Ivanovitch, and so I laid down here." I did feel angry and sorry too. "Surely you might undertake some other duty, Emelyanushka, instead of lying here guarding the steps," I said. "Why, what other duty, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "You lost soul!" I was in such a rage, I called him that. "If you could but learn tailoring work! Look at your old rag of a coat. It's not enough to have it in tatters. Here you are sweeping the steps with it. You might take a needle and boggle up your rags, as decency demands." "Ah, you drunken man!" "What do you think, sir? He actually did take a needle. Of course I said it in jest. But he was so scared he set to work. He took off his coat and began threading the needle. I watched him, as you may well guess. His eyes were all red and bleary, and his hands were all a-shake. He kept shoving and shoving the thread and could not get it through the eye of the needle. He kept screwing his eyes up and wetting the thread and twisting it in his fingers. It was no good. He gave it up and looked at me. "Well," said I, "this is a nice way to treat me. If there had been folks by to see, I don't know what I should have done. Why, you simple fellow, I said it in joke, as a reproach. Give over your nonsense, God bless you. Sit quiet and don't put me to shame. Don't sleep on my stairs and make a laughing stock of me." "Why, what am I to do, Astafy Ivanovitch? I know very well I am a drunkard and good for nothing. I can do nothing but vex you, my benefactor." And at that his blue lips began all of a sudden to quiver, and a tear ran down his white cheek and trembled on his stubbly chin. And then poor Emelyanoushka burst into a regular flood of tears. Mercy on us! I felt as though a knife were thrust into my heart. The sensitive creature! I'd never have expected it. Who could have guessed it? No, Emelyanoushka, thought I shall give you up altogether. You can go your way like the rubbish you are. Well, sir, why make a long story of it? And the whole affair is so trifling it's not worth wasting words upon. Why, you, for instance, sir, would not have given a thought to it, but I would have given it a great deal, if I had a great deal to give, that it never should have happened at all. I had a pair of riding breeches by me. Sir, deuce take them! Fine, first-rate riding breeches they were, too, blue with a check on it. They had been ordered by a gentleman from the country, but he would not have them after all, and said they were not full enough, so they were left on my hands. It struck me they were worth something. At the second-hand dealer's I ought to get 5 silver roubles for them. Or if not, I could turn them into 2 pairs of trousers for Petersburg gentlemen, and have a piece over for a waistcoat for myself. Of course, for poor people like us, everything comes in. And it happened just then that Emelyanoushka was having a sad time of it. There he sat day after day. He did not drink, not a drop passed his lips, but he sat and moped like an owl. It was sad to see him. He just sat and brooded. Well, thought I, either you've not a copper to spend, my lad, or else you've turning over a new leaf of yourself. You've given it up. You listened to reason. Well, sir, that's how it was with us, and just then came a holiday. I went to vespers. When I came home, I found Emelyanoushka sitting in the window, drunk and rocking to and fro. Ah, so that's what you've been up to, my lad. And I went to get something out of my chest, and when I looked in, the breeches were not there. I rummaged here and there. They'd vanished. When I'd ransacked everywhere and saw they were not there, something seemed to stab me to the heart. I ran first to the old dame and began accusing her. Of Emelyanoushka I had not the faintest suspicion, though there was cause for it in its sitting there drunk. No, said the old body. God be with you, my fine gentleman. What good are riding breeches to me? Am I going to wear such things? Why, a skirt I had lost the other day through a fellow of your sort. I know nothing. I can tell you nothing about it, she said. Who has been here? Who has been in? I asked. Why, nobody has been, my good sir, says she. I've been here all the while. Emelyan Ilyitch went out and came back again. There he sits. Ask him. Emelyanoushka, said I, have you taken those new riding breeches for anything? You remember the pair I made for that gentleman from the country? No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he, I've not sort of touched them. I was in a state. I hunted high and low for them. They were nowhere to be found. And Emelyanoushka sits there rocking himself to and fro. I was squatting on my heels facing him, and bending over the chest, and all at once I stole a glance at him. Alack, I thought, my heart suddenly grew hot within me, and I felt myself flushing up too. And suddenly Emelyanoushka looked at me. No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he, those riding breeches of yours, maybe you are thinking, maybe I took them, but I never touched them. But what can have become of them, Emelyan Ilyitch? No, Astafy Ivanovitch, said he, I've never seen them. Why, Emelyan Ilyitch, I suppose they've run off of themselves, eh? Maybe they have, Astafy Ivanovitch. When I heard him say that, I got up at once, went up to him, lighted the lamp, and sat down to work to my sewing. I was altering a waistcoat for a clerk who lived below us, and wasn't there a burning pain and ache in my breast? I shouldn't have minded so much if I had put all the clothes I had in the fire. Emelyanoushka seemed to have an inkling of what rage I was in. When a man is guilty, you know, sir, he scents trouble far off, like the birds of the air before a storm. Do you know what, Astafy Ivanovitch? Emelyanoushka began, and his poor old voice was shaking as he said the words. Antip Prohoritch, the apothecary, married the coachman's wife this morning, who died the other day. I did give him a look, sir, a nasty look it was. Emelyanoushka understood it too. I saw him get up, go to the bed, and begin to rummage there for something. I waited. He was busy there a long time, and kept muttering all the while. No, not there. Where can the blessed things have got to? I waited to see what he'd do. I saw him creep under the bed on all fours. I couldn't bear it any longer. What are you crawling about under the bed for? Emelyan Ilyitch, said I. Looking for the breeches, Astafy Ivanovitch. Maybe they've dropped down there somewhere. Why should you try to help a poor simple man like me, said I. Crawling on your knees for nothing, sir? I called him that in my vexation. "Oh, never mind, Astafy Ivanovitch, I'll just look. They'll turn up, maybe, somewhere." Said I. "Look here, Emelyan Ilyitch." "What is it, Astafy Ivanovitch?" said he. "Haven't you simply stolen them from me like a thief and a robber in return for the bread and salt you've eaten here?" said I. I felt so angry, sir, at seeing him fooling about on his hands before me. "No, Astafy Ivanovitch." And he stayed lying as he was on his face under the bed. A long time he lay there, and then at last crept out. I looked at him, and the man was as white as a sheet. He stood up and sat down near me in the window, and sat so for some 10 minutes. "No, Astafy Ivanovitch," he said, and all at once he stood up and came towards me. And I can see him now. He looked dreadful. "No, Astafy Ivanovitch," said he. "I never sort of touched your breeches." He was all of a shake, poking himself in the chest with a trembling finger, and his poor old voice shook so that I was frightened, sir, and sat as though I was rooted to the window-seat. "Well, Emelyan Ilyitch," said I, "as you will, forgive me if I, in my foolishness, have accused you unjustly. As for the breeches, let them go hang. We can live without them. We've still our hands, thank God. We need not go thieving or begging from some other poor man. We'll earn our bread." Emelyanushka heard me out, and went on standing there before me. I looked up, and he had sat down, and there he sat all the evening without stirring. At last I lay down to sleep. Emelyanushka went on sitting in the same place. When I looked out in the morning, he was lying curled up in his old coat on the bare floor. He felt too crushed even to come to bed. Well, sir, I felt no more liking for the fellow from that day. In fact, for the first few days I hated him. I felt as one may say as though my own son had robbed me, and done me a deadly hurt. "Ach," thought I, Emelyanushka, Emelyanushka." And Emelyanushka, sir, went on drinking for a whole fortnight without stopping. He was drunk all the time, and regularly besotted. He went out in the morning and came back late at night, and for a whole fortnight I didn't get a word out of him. It was as though grief was gnawing at his heart, or as though he wanted to do for himself completely. At last he stopped. He must have come to the end of all he'd got, and then he sat in the window again. I remember he sat there without speaking for 3 days and 3 nights. All of a sudden I saw that he was crying. He was just sitting there, sir, and crying like anything, a perfect stream, as though he didn't know how his tears were flowing. And it's a sad thing, sir, to see a grown-up man, and an old man too, crying from woe and grief. "What's the matter, Emelyanushka?" said I. He began to tremble so that he shook all over. I spoke to him for the first time since that evening. "Nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch." "God be with you, Emelyanushka. What's lost is lost. Why are you moping about like this?" I felt sorry for him. "Oh, nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch. It's no matter. I want to find some work to do, Astafy Ivanovitch." "And what sort of work, pray, Emelyanushka?" "Why, any sort. Perhaps I could find a situation, such as I used to have. I've been already to ask Fyodor Ivanovitch. I don't think to be a burden on you, Astafy Ivanovitch. If I can find a situation, Astafy Ivanovitch, then I'll pay it all you back, and make you return for all your hospitality." "Enough, Emelyanushka, enough. Let bygones be bygones, and no more to be said about it. Let us go on as we used to before." "No, Astafy Ivanovitch, you, maybe, think, but I never touched your riding breeches." "Well, have it your own way. God be with you, Emelyanushka." "No, Astafy Ivanovitch, I can't go on living with you, that's clear. You must excuse me, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Why, God bless you, Emelyan Ilyitch. Who's offending you and driving you out of the place? Am I doing it?" "No, it's not the proper thing for me to live with you like this, Astafy Ivanovitch. I'd better be going." He was so hurt, it seemed. He stuck to his point. I looked at him, and sure enough, up he got and pulled his old coat over his shoulders. "But where are you going, Emelyan Ilyitch? Listen to reason. What are you about? Where are you off to?" "No, good-bye, Astafy Ivanovitch. Don't keep me now." And he was blubbering again. "I'd better be going. You're not the same now." "Not the same as what? I am the same. But you'll be lost by yourself like a poor helpless babe, Emelyan Ilyitch." "No, Astafy Ivanovitch. When you go out now you lock up your chest, and it makes me cry to see it, Astafy Ivanovitch. You better let me go, Astafy Ivanovitch, and forgive me all the trouble I've given you while I've been living with you." Well, sir, the man went away. I waited for a day. I expected he'd be back in the evening. Nope, Next day no sign of him, nor the third day either. I began to get frightened. I was so worried I couldn't drink, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The fellow had quite disarmed me. On the fourth day I went out to look for him. I peeped into all the taverns to inquire for him, but no, Emelyanushka was lost. "Have you managed to keep yourself alive, Emelyanushka?" I wondered. "Perhaps he is lying dead under some hedge, poor drunkard, like a sodden log." I went home more dead than alive. Next day I went out to look for him again, and I kept cursing myself that I had been such a fool as to let the man go off by himself. On the fifth day it was a holiday. In the early morning I heard the door creak. I looked up, and there was my Emelyanushka coming in. His face was blue, and his hair was covered with dirt, as though he had been sleeping in the street. He was as thin as a match. He took off his old coat, sat down on the chest, and looked at me. I was delighted to see him, but I felt more upset about him than ever. For you see, sir, if I had been overtaken in some sin, as true as I am here, sir, I'd have died like a dog before I'd have come back. But Emelyanushka did come back, and a sad thing it was, sure enough, to see a man sunk so low. I began to look after him, to talk kindly to him, to comfort him. "Well, Emelyanushka," said I am glad you've come back. Had you been away much longer, I should have gone to look for you in the taverns again to-day. Are you hungry?" "No, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Come now, aren't you really? Here, brother, is some cabbage soup left over from yesterday. There was meat in it. It is good stuff. And here is some bread and onion. Come, eat it. It'll do you no harm." I made him eat it, and I saw at once that the man had not tasted food for maybe 3 days. He was as hungry as a wolf. So it was hunger that had driven him to me. My heart was melted looking at the poor dear. Let me run to the tavern, thought I. I'll get something to ease his heart, and then we'll make an end of it. I have no more anger in my heart against you, Emelyanushka. I brought him some vodka. Here, Emelyan Ilyitch, let us have a drink for the holiday. Like a drink? And it will do you good. He held out his hand, held it out greedily. He was just taking it, and then he stopped himself. But a minute after I saw him take it and lift it to his mouth, spilling it on his sleeve. But though he got it to his lips, he set it down on the table again. "What is it, Emelyanushka?" "Nothing, Astafy Ivanovitch. Sort of." "Won't you drink it?" "Well, Astafy Ivanovitch, I'm not, going to drink any more, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Do you mean you've given it up altogether, Emelyanushka? Or are you only not going to drink today?" He did not answer. A minute later I saw him rest his head on his hand. "What's the matter, Emelyanushka? Are you ill?" "Why, yes, Astafy Ivanovitch. I don't feel well." I took him and laid him down on the bed. I saw that he really was ill. His head was burning hot, and he was shivering with fever. I sat by him all day. Towards night he was worse. I mixed him some oil and onion and kvass and bread broken up. "Come, eat some of this," said I, "and perhaps you'll be better." He shook his head. "No," said he, "I won't have any dinner to-day, Astafy Ivanovitch." I made some tea for him. I quite flustered our old woman. He was no better. Well, thinks I, it's a bad lookout. The third morning I went for a medical gentleman. There was one I knew living close by, Kostopravov by name. I made his acquaintance when I was in service with the Bosomyagins. He'd attended me. The doctor came and looked at him. "He's in a bad way," said he. "It was no use sending for me, but if you like I can give him a powder." Well, I didn't give him a powder. I thought that's just the doctor's little game, and then the fifth day came. He lay, sir, dying before my eyes. I sat in the window with my work in my hands. The old woman was heating the stove. We were all silent. My heart was simply breaking over him, the good-for-nothing fellow. I felt as if it were a son of my own I was losing. I knew that Emelyanushka was looking at me. He'd seen the man all the day long, making up his mind to say something and not daring to. At last I looked up at him. I saw such misery in the poor fellow's eyes. He had kept them fixed on me. But when he saw that I was looking at him, he looked down at once. "Astafy Ivanovitch?" "What is it, Emelyanushka?" "If you were to take my old coat to a second-hand dealer's, how much do you think they'd give you for it, Astafy Ivanovitch?" "Oh, there's no knowing how much they'd give. Maybe they would give me a rouble for it, Emelyan Ilyitch. But if I had taken it, they wouldn't have given a farthing for it, but would have laughed in my face for bringing such a trumpery thing. I simply said that to comfort the poor fellow, knowing the simpleton he was. But I was thinking, Astafy Ivanovitch, they might give you 3 roubles for it. It's made of cloth, Astafy Ivanovitch. How could they only give 1 rouble for a cloth coat?" "I don't know, Emelyan Ilyitch," said I. "If you are thinking of taking it, you should certainly ask 3 roubles to begin with." Emelyanoushka was silent for a time, and then he addressed me again. "Astafy Ivanovitch." "What is it, Emelyanoushka?" I asked. "Sell my coat when I die, and don't bury me in it. I can lie as well without it. And it's a thing of some value. It might come in useful." I can't tell you how it made my heart ache to hear him. I saw that the death agony was coming on him. We were silent again for a bit. So an hour passed by. I looked at him again. He was still staring at me, and when he met my eyes he looked down again. "Do you want some water to drink, Emelyan Ilyitch?" I asked. "Give me some, God bless you, Astafy Ivanovitch." I gave him a drink. "Thank you, Astafy Ivanovitch," said he. "Is there anything else you would like, Emelyanoushka?" "No, Astafy Ivanovitch, there's nothing I want, but I sort of—" "What?" "I only—" "What is it, Emelyanoushka?" "Those riding breeches. It was sort of I who took them, Astafy Ivanovitch." "Well, God forgive you, Emelyanoushka," said I. "You poor sorrowful creature. Depart in peace." And I was choking myself, sir, and the tears were in my eyes. I turned aside for a moment. "Astafy Ivanovitch!" I saw Emelyanoushka wanted to tell me something. He was trying to sit up, trying to speak, and mumbling something. He flushed red all over suddenly, looked at me. Then I saw him turn white again, whiter and whiter, and he seemed to sink away all in a minute. His head fell back. He drew one breath and gave up his soul to God. End of chapter 1. Recording by
.org. Recording by Amy Muggleston. Short Stories by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Chapter 2. A Novel in 9 Letters. 1. From Pyotr Ivanitch to Ivan Petrovitch. Dear Sir, and most precious friend, Ivan Petrovitch. For the last 2 days I have been, I may say, in pursuit of you, my friend, having to talk over most urgent business with you, and I cannot come across you anywhere. Yesterday, while we were at Semyon Alexeyitch's, my wife made a very good joke about you, saying that Tatiana Petrovna and you were a pair of birds always on the wing. You've not been married 3 months, and you already neglect your domestic hearth. We all laughed heartily, from our genuine kindly feeling for you, of course. But joking apart, my precious friend, you've given me a lot of trouble. Semyon Alexeyitch said to me that you might be going to the ball at the Social Unions Club. Leaving my wife with Semyon Alexeyitch's good lady, I flew off to the Social Union. It was funny and tragic. Fancy my position, me at the ball and alone, without my wife. Ivan Andreyitch, meeting me in the porter's lodge and seeing me alone, at once concluded, the rascal, that I had a passion for dances, and taking me by the arm wanted to drag me off by force to a dancing class, saying that it was too crowded at the Social Union, that an ardent spirit had not room to turn, and that his head ached from the Pachulian mignonette. I found neither you nor Tatiana Petrovna. Ivan Andreyitch vowed and declared that you would be at Woe from Wit at the Alexandrinsky Theatre. I flew off to the Alexandrinsky Theatre. You are not there either. This morning I expected to find you at Chistoganov's. No sign of you there. Chistoganov sent to the Perepalkins, the same thing there. In fact, I am quite worn out. You can judge how much trouble I've taken. Now I am writing to you. There is nothing else I can do. My business is by no means a literary one. You understand me? It would be better to meet face to face. It is extremely necessary to discuss something with you, and as quickly as possible, and so I beg you to come to us today, with Tatiana Petrovna, to tea, and for a chat in the evening. My Anna Mihailovna will be extremely pleased to see you. You will, truly, as they say, oblige me to my dying day. By the way, my precious friend, since I have taken up my pen, I'll go into all I have against you. I have a slight complaint I must make. In fact, I must reproach you, my worthy friend, for an apparently very innocent little trick, which you have played at my expense. You are a rascal, a man without conscience. About the middle of last month, you brought into my house an acquaintance of yours, Yevgeny Nikolaevich. You vouched for him by your friendly, and for me, of course, sacred recommendation. I rejoiced at the opportunity of receiving the young man with open arms, and when I did so, I put my head in a noose. A noose it hardly is, but it has turned out a pretty business. I have not time now to explain, and indeed it is a very awkward thing to do in writing, only a very humble request to you, my malicious friend. Could you not somehow very delicately, in passing, drop a hint into the young man's ear that there are a great many houses in the metropolis besides ours? It's more than I can stand, my dear fellow. We fall at your feet, as our friend Semyonovitch says. I will tell you all about it when we meet. I don't mean to say that the young man has sinned against good manners, or is lacking in spiritual qualities, or is not up to the mark in some other way. On the contrary, he's an amiable and pleasant fellow. But wait, we shall meet. Meanwhile, if you see him, for goodness sake, whisper a hint to him, my good friend. I would do it myself, but you know what I am. I simply can't, and that's all about it. You introduced him, but I will explain myself more fully this evening anyway. Now, goodbye. I remain, etc. P.S. My little boy has been ailing for the last week, and gets worse and worse every day. He is cutting his poor little teeth. My wife is nursing him all the time and is depressed, poor thing. Be sure to come. You will give us real pleasure, my precious friend. 2. From Ivan Petrovitch to Pyotr Ivanitch. Dear Sir, Pyotr Ivanitch, I got your letter yesterday. I read it and was perplexed. You looked for me, goodness knows where, and I was simply at home. Till 10 o'clock I was expecting Ivan Ivanitch Tolokonov. At once on getting your letter I set out with my wife. I went to the expense of taking a cab and reached your house about 6:30. You were not at home, but we were met by your wife. I waited to see you till 10:30. I could not stay later. I set off with my wife, went to the expense of a cab again, saw her home, and went on myself to the Perepalkins, thinking I might meet you there. But again I was out in my reckoning. When I get home I did not sleep all night. I felt uneasy. In the morning I drove round to you 3 times, at 9, at 10, and at 11. 3 times I went to the expense of a cab, and again you left me in the lurch. I read your letter and was amazed. You write about Yevgeny Nikolaevich, beg me to whisper some hint, and do not tell me what about. I commend your caution, but all letters are not alike, and I don't give documents of importance to my wife for curl papers. I am puzzled, in fact, to know with what motive you wrote all this to me. However, if it comes to that, why should I meddle in the matter? I don't poke my nose into other people's business. You can be not at home to him. I only see that I must have a brief and decisive explanation with you, and moreover time is passing, and I am in straits and don't know what to do if you are going to neglect the terms of our agreement. A journey for nothing. A journey costs something, too, and my wife's whining for me to get her a velvet mantle of the latest fashion. About Yevgeny Nikolaevich, I hasten to mention that when I was at Pavel Semyonovitch Perepalkin's yesterday, I made inquiries without loss of time. He has 500 serfs in the province of Yaroslav, and he has expectations from his grandmother of an estate of 300 serfs near Moscow. How much money he has, I cannot tell. I think you ought to know that better. I beg you once for all to appoint a place where I can meet you. You met Ivan Andreitch yesterday, and you write that he told you that I was at the Alexandrinsky Theatre with my wife. I write that he is a liar, and it shows how little he is to be trusted in such cases, that only the day before yesterday he did his grandmother out of 800 roubles. I have the honour to remain, etc. P.S. My wife is going to have a baby. She is nervous about it and feels depressed at times. At the theatre they sometimes have firearms going off and sham thunderstorms, and so for fear of a shock to my wife's nerves I do not take her to the theatre. I have no great partiality for the theatre myself. 3. From Pyotr Ivanitch to Ivan Petrovitch. My precious friend, Ivan Petrovitch, I am to blame, 1,000 times to blame, but I hasten to defend myself. Between 5 and 6 yesterday, just as we were talking of you with the warmest affection, a messenger from Uncle Stepan Alexeyitch galloped up with the news that my aunt was very bad. Being afraid of alarming my wife, I did not say a word of this to her, but on the pretext of another urgent business, I drove off to my aunt's house. I found her almost dying. Just at 5 o'clock she had had a stroke, the third she has had in the last 2 years. Karl Fyodorovich, their family doctor, told us that she might not live through the night. You can judge of my position, dearest friend. We were on our legs all night in grief and anxiety. It was not till morning that, utterly exhausted and overcome by moral and physical weakness, I lay down on the sofa. I forgot to tell them to wake me, and only woke at 11:30. My aunt was better. I drove home to my wife. She, poor thing, was quite worn out expecting me. I snatched a bite of something, embraced my little boy, reassured my wife, and set off to call on you. You were not at home. At your flat, I found Yevgeny Nikolaevich. When I got home, I took up a pen, and here I am writing to you. Don't grumble and be cross to me, my true friend. Beat me, chop my guilty head off my shoulders, but don't deprive me of your affection. From your wife, I learned that you will be at the Slavyanovs this evening. I will certainly be there. I look forward with the greatest impatience to seeing you. I remain, etc. P.S. We are in perfect despair about our little boy. Karl Fyodorovich prescribes rhubarb. He moans. Yesterday he did not know anyone. This morning he did know us, and began lisping, Papa, Mamma, Boo. My wife was in tears the whole morning. 4. From Ivan Petrovitch to Pyotr Ivanitch. My dear Sir, Pyotr Ivanitch, I am writing to you in your room at your bureau, and before taking up my pen I have been waiting for more than 2.5 hours for you. Now allow me to tell you straight out, Pyotr Ivanitch, my frank opinion about this shabby incident. From your last letter I gathered that you were expected at the Slavyanovs, and that you were inviting me to go there. I turned up. I stayed for 5 hours, and there was no sign of you. Why am I to be made a laughing-stock to people, do you suppose? Excuse me, my dear sir. I came to you this morning. I hoped to find you, not imitating certain deceitful persons who look for people God knows where, when they can be found at home at any suitably chosen time. There is no sign of you at home. I don't know what restrains me from telling you now the whole harsh truth. I will only say that I see you seem to be going back on your bargain regarding our agreement. And only now, reflecting on the whole affair, I cannot but confess that I am absolutely astounded at the artful workings of your mind. I see clearly now that you have been cherishing your unfriendly design for a long time. This supposition of mine is confirmed by the fact that last week, in an almost unpardonable way, you took possession of that letter of yours addressed to me, in which you laid down yourself, though rather vaguely and incoherently, the terms of our agreement in regard to a circumstance of which I need not remind you. You are afraid of documents, you destroy them, and you try to make a fool of me. But I won't allow myself to be made a fool of, for no one has ever considered me one hitherto, and everyone has thought well of me in that respect. I am opening my eyes. You try and put me off, confuse me with talk of Yevgeny Nikolaevich, and when with your letter of the 7th of this month, which I am still at a loss to understand, I seek a personal explanation from you, you make humbugging appointments, while you keep out of the way. Surely you do not suppose, sir, that I am not equal to noticing this? You promised to reward me for my services, of which you are very well aware, in the way of introducing various persons, and at the same time, and I don't know how you do it, you contrive to borrow money from me in considerable sums without giving a receipt, as happened no longer ago than last week. Now, having got the money, you keep out of the way, and what's more, you repudiate the service I have done you in regard to Yevgeny Nikolaevich. You are probably reckoning on my speedy departure for Simbirsk, and hoping I may not have time to settle your business. But I assure you solemnly, and testify on my word of honour, that if it comes to that, I am prepared to spend 2 more months in Petersburg, expressly to carry through my business, to attain my objects, and to get a hold of you. For I too, on occasion, know how to get the better of people. In conclusion, I beg to inform you that if you do not give me a satisfactory explanation today, first in writing and then personally, face to face, and do not make a fresh statement in your letter of the chief points of the agreement existing between us, and do not explain fully your views in regard to Yevgeny Nikolaevich, I shall be compelled to have recourse to measures that will be highly unpleasant to you, and indeed repugnant to me also. Allow me to remain, etc. 5. From Pyotr Ivanitch to Ivan Petrovitch. November the 11th. My dear and honoured friend, Ivan Petrovitch, I was cut to the heart by your letter. I wonder you were not ashamed, my dear but unjust friend, to behave like this to one of your most devoted friends. Why be in such a hurry, and without explaining things fully, wound me with such insulting suspicions? But I hasten to reply to your charges. You did not find me yesterday, Ivan Petrovitch, because I was suddenly and quite unexpectedly called away to a deathbed. My aunt, Yefima Nikolaevna, passed away yesterday evening at 11 o'clock in the night. By the general consent of the relatives, I was selected to make arrangements for the sad and sorrowful ceremony. I had so much to do that I had not time to see you this morning, nor even to send you a line. I am grieved to the heart at the misunderstanding which has arisen between us. My words about Yevgeny Nikolaitch, uttered casually and in jest, you have taken in quite a wrong sense, and have ascribed them to a meaning deeply offensive to me. You refer to money and express your anxiety about it, but without wasting words I am ready to satisfy all your claims and demands, though I must remind you that the 350 roubles I had from you last week were in accordance with a certain agreement, and not by way of a loan. In the latter case there would certainly have been a receipt. I will not condescend to discuss the other points mentioned in your letter. I see that it is a misunderstanding. I see that it is your habitual hastiness, hot temper, and obstinacy. I know that your good-heartedness and open character will not allow doubts to persist in your heart, and that you will be, in fact, the first to hold out your hand to me. You are mistaken, Ivan Petrovitch. You are greatly mistaken. Although your letter has deeply wounded me, I should be prepared even today to come to you and apologise, but I have been since yesterday in such a rush and flurry that I am utterly exhausted and can scarcely stand on my feet. To complete my troubles, my wife is laid up. I am afraid she is seriously ill. Our little boy, thank God, is better, but I must lay down my pen. I have a mass of things to do, and they are urgent. Allow me, my dear friend, to remain, etc. 6. From Ivan Petrovitch to Pyotr Ivanitch. November the 14th. Dear Sir, Pyotr Ivanitch, I have been waiting for 3 days. I tried to make a profitable use of them. Meanwhile, I feel that politeness and good manners are the greatest ornaments for everyone. Since my last letter of the 10th of this month, I have neither by word nor deed reminded you of my existence, partly in order to allow you undisturbed to perform the duty of a Christian in regard to your aunt, partly because I needed the time for certain considerations and investigations in regard to a business you know of. Now, I hasten to explain myself to you in the most thoroughgoing and decisive manner. I frankly confess that on reading your first 2 letters, I seriously supposed that you did not understand what I wanted. That was how it was that I rather sought an interview with you and explanations face to face. I was afraid of writing and blamed myself for lack of clearness in the expression of my thoughts on paper. You are aware that I have not the advantages of education and good manners, and that I shun a hollow show of gentility, because I have learned from bitter experience how misleading appearances often are, and that a snake sometimes lies hidden under flowers. But you understood me. You did not answer me as you should have done because, in the treachery of your heart, you had planned beforehand to be faithless to your word of honour and to the friendly relations existing between us. You have proved this absolutely by your abominable conduct towards me of late, which is fatal to my interests, which I did not expect, and which I refused to believe until the present moment. From the very beginning of our acquaintance you captivated me with your clever manners, by the subtlety of your behaviour, your knowledge of affairs, and the advantages to be gained by an association with you. I imagined that I had found a true friend and well-wisher. Now I recognise clearly that there are many people who under a flattering and brilliant exterior hide venom in their hearts, who use their cleverness to weave snares for their neighbour and for unpardonable deception, and so are afraid of pen and paper, and at the same time use their fine language not for the benefit of their neighbour and their country, but to drug and bewitch the reason of those who have entered into business relations of any sort with them. Your treachery to me, my dear sir, can be clearly seen from what follows. In the first place, when, in the clear and distinct terms of my letter, I described my position, sir, and at the same time asked you in my first letter what you meant by certain expressions and intentions of yours, principally in regard to Yevgeny Nikolaevich, you tried for the most part to avoid answering, and confounding me by doubts and suspicions, you calmly put the subject aside. Then, after treating me in a way which cannot be described by any seemly word, you began writing that you were wounded. Pray what am I to call that, sir? Then, when every minute was precious to me, and when you had set me running after you all over the town, you wrote, pretending personal friendship, letters which, intentionally avoiding all mention of business, you spoke of utterly irrelevant matters, to wit, of the illnesses of your good lady, for whom I have in any case every respect, and of how your baby has been dosed with rhubarb and was cutting a tooth. All this you alluded to in every letter with a disgusting regularity that was insulting to me. Of course, I am prepared to admit that a father's heart may be torn by the sufferings of his babe, but why make mention of this when something different, far more important and interesting, was needed? I endured it in silence, but now, when time has elapsed, I think it my duty to explain myself. Finally, treacherously deceiving me several times by making humbugging appointments, you tried, it seems, to make me play the part of a fool and a laughing-stock for you, which I never intend to be. Then, after first inviting me and thoroughly deceiving me, you informed me that you were called away to your suffering aunt who had had a stroke precisely at 5 o'clock, as you stated with shameful exactitude. Luckily for me, sir, in the course of these 3 days I have succeeded in making inquiries, and have learnt from them that your aunt had a stroke on the day before the 7th, not long before midnight. From this fact I see that you have made use of sacred family relations in order to deceive persons in no way concerned with them. Finally, in your last letter, you mentioned the death of your relative, as though it had taken place precisely at the time I was to have visited you to consult about various business matters. But here the vileness of your arts and calculations exceeds all belief, for from trustworthy information, which I was able by a lucky chance to obtain just in the nick of time, I have found out that your aunt died 24 hours later than the time you so impiously fixed for her decease in your letter. I shall never have done if I enumerate all the signs by which I have discovered your treachery in regard to me. It is sufficient, indeed, for any impartial observer that in every letter you style me your true friend, and call me all sorts of polite names, which you do, to the best of my belief, for no other object than to put my conscience to sleep. I have come now to your principal act of deceit and treachery in regard to me, to wit, your continual silence of late in regard to everything concerning our common interests, in regard to your wicked theft of the letter in which you stated, though in language somewhat obscure and not perfectly intelligible to me, our mutual agreements, your barbarous forcible loan of 350 roubles, which you borrowed from me as your partner without giving any receipt, and finally, your abominable slanders of our common acquaintance Yevgeny Nikolaevich. I see clearly now that you meant to show me that he was, if you will allow me to say so, like a billy goat, good for neither milk nor wool, that he was neither one thing nor the other, neither fish nor flesh, which you put down as a vice in him in your letter of the 6th instant. I knew Yevgeny Nikolaevich as a modest and well-behaved young man, whereby he may well attract, gain, and deserve respect in society. I know also that every evening for the last fortnight you've put into your pocket dozens and sometimes even hundreds of roubles, playing games of chance with Yevgeny Nikolaevich. Now you disavow all this, and not only refuse to compensate me for what I have suffered, but have even appropriated money belonging to me, tempting me by suggestions that I should be a partner in the affair, and luring me with various advantages which were to accrue. After having appropriated, in a most illegal way, money of mine and of Yevgeny Nikolaevich's, you decline to compensate me, resorting for that object to calumny, with which you have unjustifiably blackened in my eyes a man whom I, by my efforts and exertions, introduced into your house. While on the contrary, from what I hear from your friends, you are still almost slobbering over him, and give out to the whole world that he is your dearest friend, though there is no one in the world such a fool as not to guess at once what your designs are aiming at, and what your friendly relations really mean. I should say that they mean deceit, treachery, forgetfulness of human duties and proprieties, contrary to the law of God, and vicious in every way. I take myself as proof and example. In what way have I offended you, and why have you treated me in this godless fashion? I will end my letter. I have explained myself. Now, in conclusion, if, sir, you do not, in the shortest possible time after receiving this letter, return to me in full, first, the 350 roubles I gave you, and secondly, all the sums that should come to me according to your promise, I will have recourse to every possible means to compel you to return it, even to open force, secondly to the protection of the laws, and finally, I beg to inform you that I am in possession of facts which, if they remain in the hands of your humble servant, may ruin and disgrace your name in the eyes of all the world. Allow me to remain, etc. 7. From Pyotr Ivanitch to Ivan Petrovitch. November the 15th. Ivan Petrovitch, when I received your vulgar, and at the same time queer letter, my impulse for the first minute was to tear it to shreds, but I have preserved it as a curiosity. I do, however, sincerely regret our misunderstandings and unpleasant relations. I did not mean to answer you, but I am compelled by necessity. I must in these lines inform you that it would be very unpleasant for me to see you in my house at any time. My wife feels the same. She is in delicate health, and the smell of tar upsets her. My wife sends your wife the book Don Quixote de la Mancha, with her sincere thanks. As for the galoshes you say you left behind here on your last visit, I must regretfully inform you that they are nowhere to be found. They are still being looked for, but if they do not turn up, then I will buy you a new pair. I have the honour to remain your sincere friend. 8. On the 16th of November, Pyotr Ivanitch received by post 2 letters addressed to him. Opening the first envelope, he took out a carefully folded note on pale pink paper. The handwriting was his wife's. It was addressed to Yevgeny Nikolaevich and dated November the 2nd. There was nothing else in the envelope. Pyotr Ivanitch read, Dear Eugene, yesterday was utterly impossible. My husband was at home the whole evening. Be sure to come tomorrow punctually at 11. At 10:30 my husband is going to Tsarko and not coming back till evening. I was in a rage all night. Thank you for sending me the information and the correspondence. What a lot of paper. Did she really write all that? She has style, though. Many thanks, dear. I see that you love me. Don't be angry, but for goodness sake, come tomorrow. A. Pyotr Ivanitch tore open the other letter. Pyotr Ivanitch, I should never have set foot in your house again anyway. You need not have troubled to soil paper about it. Next week I am going to Simbirsk. Yevgeny Nikolaevich remains your precious and beloved friend. I wish you luck, and don't trouble about the galoshes. 9. On the 17th of November, Ivan Petrovitch received by post 2 letters addressed to him. Opening the first letter, he took out a hasty and carelessly written note. The handwriting was his wife's. It was addressed to Yevgeny Nikolaevich and dated August the 4th. There was nothing else in the envelope. Ivan Petrovitch read, Goodbye, goodbye, Yevgeny Nikolaevich. The Lord reward you for this too. May you be happy, but my lot is bitter, terribly bitter. It is your choice. If it had not been for my aunt, I should not have put such trust in you. Do not laugh at me, nor at my aunt. Tomorrow is our wedding. Aunt is relieved that a good man has been found, and that he will take me without a dowry. I took a good look at him for the first time today. He seems good-natured. They are hurrying me. Farewell, farewell, my darling. Think of me sometimes. I shall never forget you. Farewell. I will sign this like my first letter. Do you remember? Tatiana. The second letter was as follows. Ivan Petrovitch. Tomorrow you will receive a new pair of galoshes. It is not my habit to filch from other men's pockets, and I am not fond of picking up all sorts of rubbish in the streets. Yevgeny Nikolaevich is going to Simbirsk in a day or two on his grandfather's business, and he has asked me to find a travelling companion for him. Wouldn't you like to take him with you? End of chapter 2.
Recording by Bruce Pary. Short Stories by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Chapter 3. An Unpleasant Predicament, Part 1. This unpleasant business occurred at the epoch when the regeneration of our beloved fatherland and the struggle of her valiant sons towards new hopes and destinies was beginning with irresistible force and with a touchingly naive impetuosity. One winter evening in that period, between 11 and 12 o'clock, 3 highly respectable gentlemen were sitting in a comfortable and even luxuriously furnished room in a handsome house of 2 stories on the Petersburg side, and were engaged in a staid and edifying conversation on a very interesting subject. These 3 gentlemen were all of general's rank. They were sitting round a little table, each in a soft and handsome armchair, and as they talked, they quietly and luxuriously sipped champagne. The bottle stood on the table on a silver stand with ice round it. The fact was that the host, a privy councillor called Stepan Nikiforovitch Nikiforov, an old bachelor of 65, was celebrating his removal into a house he had just bought, and, as it happened, also his birthday, which he had never kept before. The festivity, however, was not on a very grand scale. As we have seen already, there were only 2 guests, both of them former colleagues and former subordinates of Mr. Nikiforov. That is, an actual civil councillor called Semyon Ivanovitch Shipulenko, and another actual civil councillor, Ivan Ilyitch Pralensky. They had arrived to tea at 9 o'clock, then had begun upon the wine, and knew that at exactly 11:30 they would have to set off home. Their host had all his life been fond of regularity. A few words about him. He had begun his career as a petty clerk with nothing to back him, had quietly plodded on for 45 years, knew very well what to work towards, had no ambition to draw the stars down from heaven, though he had 2 stars already, and particularly disliked expressing his own opinion on any subject. He was honest, too, that is, it had not happened to him to do anything particularly dishonest. He was a bachelor because he was an egoist. He had plenty of brains, but he could not bear showing his intelligence. He particularly disliked slovenliness and enthusiasm, regarding it as moral slovenliness, and towards the end of his life had become completely absorbed in a voluptuous, indolent comfort and systematic solitude. Though he sometimes visited people of a rather higher rank than his own, yet from his youth up he could never endure entertaining visitors himself, and of late he had, if he did not play a game of patience, been satisfied with the society of his dining-room clock, and would spend the whole evening dozing in his armchair, listening placidly to its ticking under its glass case on the chimney-piece. In appearance he was closely shaven and extremely proper-looking. He was well-preserved, looking younger than his age. He promised to go on living many years longer, and closely followed the rules of the highest good breeding. His post was a fairly comfortable one. He had to preside somewhere and to sign something. In short, he was regarded as a first-rate man. He had only one passion, or more accurately, one keen desire. That was to have his own house, and a house built like a gentleman's residence, not a commercial investment. His desire was at last realized. He looked out and bought a house on the Petersburg side, a good way off, it is true, but it had a garden and was an elegant house. The new owner decided that it was better for being a good way off. He did not like entertaining at home, and for driving to see anyone or to the office, he had a handsome carriage of a chocolate hue, a coachman, Mihai, and 2 little but strong and handsome horses. All this was honorably acquired by the careful frugality of 40 years, so that his heart rejoiced over it. This was how it was that Stepan Nikiforovitch felt such pleasure in his placid heart that he actually invited 2 friends to see him on his birthday, which he had hitherto carefully concealed from his most intimate acquaintances. He had special designs on one of these visitors. He lived in the upper story of his new house, and he wanted a tenant for the lower half, which was built and arranged in exactly the same way. Stepan Nikiforovitch was reckoning upon Semyon Ivanovitch Shipulenko, and had twice that evening broached the subject in the course of conversation. But Semyon Ivanovitch made no response. The latter, too, was a man who had doggedly made a way for himself in the course of long years. He had black hair and whiskers and a face that always had a shade of jaundice. He was a married man of morose disposition who liked to stay at home. He ruled his household with a rod of iron. In his official duties he had the greatest self-confidence. He, too, knew perfectly well what goal he was making for, and, better still, what he never would reach. He was in a good position, and he was sitting tight there. Though he looked upon the new reforms with a certain distaste, he was not particularly agitated about them. He was extremely self-confident, and listened with a shade of ironical malice to Ivan Ilyitch Pralinsky expatiating on new themes. All of them had been drinking rather freely, however, so that Stepan Nikiforovitch himself condescended to take part in a slight discussion with Mr. Pralinsky concerning the latest reforms. But we must say a few words about His Excellency Mr. Pralinsky, especially as he is the chief hero of the present story. The actual civil councillor Ivan Ilyitch Pralinsky had only been His Excellency for 4 months. In short, he was a young general. He was young in years, too, only 43, no more, and he looked and liked to look even younger. He was a tall, handsome man, he was smart in his dress, and prided himself on its solid, dignified character. With great aplomb he displayed an order of some consequence on his breast. From his earliest childhood he had known how to acquire the airs and graces of aristocratic society, and, being a bachelor, dreamed of a wealthy and even aristocratic bride. He dreamed of many other things, though he was far from being stupid. At times he was a great talker, and even liked to assume a parliamentary pose. He came of a good family. He was the son of a general, and brought up in the lap of luxury. In his tender childhood he had been dressed in velvet and fine linen, had been educated at an aristocratic school, and though he acquired very little learning there, he was successful in the service, and had worked his way up to being a general. The authorities looked upon him as a capable man, and even expected great things from him in the future. Stepan Nikiforovitch, under whom Ivan Ilyitch had begun his career in the service, and under whom he had remained until he was made a general, had never considered him a good business-man, and had no expectations of him whatever. What he liked in him was that he belonged to a good family, had property, that is, a big block of buildings let out in flats, in charge of an overseer, was connected with persons of consequence, and, what was more, had a majestic bearing. Stepan Nikiforovitch blamed him, inwardly, for excess of imagination and instability. Ivan Ilyitch himself felt at times that he had too much amour-propre, and even sensitiveness. Strange to say, he had attacks from time to time of morbid tenderness of conscience, and even a kind of faint remorse. With bitterness and a secret soreness of heart, he recognized now and again that he did not fly so high as he imagined. At such moments he sank into despondency, especially when he was suffering from hemorrhoids, called his life une existence manquée, and ceased, privately, of course, to believe even in his parliamentary capacities, calling himself a talker, a maker of phrases, and though all that, of course, did him great credit, it did not in the least prevent him from raising his head again half an hour later, and growing even more obstinately, even more conceitedly self-confident, and assuring himself that he would yet succeed in making his mark, and that he would be not only a great official, but a statesman whom Russia would long remember. He actually dreamed at times of monuments. From this it will be seen that Ivan Ilyitch aimed high, though he hid his vague hopes and dreams deep in his heart. even with a certain trepidation. In short, he was a good-natured man and a poet at heart. Of late years these morbid moments of disillusionment had begun to be more frequent. He had become peculiarly irritable, ready to take offence, and was apt to take any contradiction as an affront. But reformed Russia gave him great hopes. His promotion to general was the finishing touch. He was roused. He held his head up. He suddenly began talking freely and eloquently. He talked about the new ideas, which he very quickly and unexpectedly made his own and professed with vehemence. He sought opportunities for speaking, drove about the town, and in many places succeeded in gaining the reputation of a desperate liberal, which flattered him greatly. That evening, after drinking 4 glasses, he was particularly exuberant. He wanted on every point to confute Stepan Nikiforovitch, whom he had not seen for some time past, and whom he had hitherto always respected and even obeyed. He considered him, for some reason, reactionary, and fell upon him with exceptional heat. Stepan Nikiforovitch hardly answered him, but only listened slyly, though the subject interested him. Ivan Ilyitch got hot, and in the heat of the discussion sipped his glass more often than he ought to have done. Then Stepan Nikiforovitch took the bottle and at once filled his glass again, which for some reason seemed to offend Ivan Ilyitch, especially as Semyon Ivanovitch Shipulenko, whom he particularly despised, and indeed feared on account of his cynicism and ill nature, preserved a treacherous silence, and smiled more frequently than was necessary. "They seem to take me for a schoolboy," flashed across Ivan Ilyitch's mind. "No, it was time, high time," he went on hotly. "We have put it off too long, and to my thinking humanity is the first consideration. Humanity with our inferiors, remembering that they too are men. Humanity will save everything, and bring out all that is—" was heard from the direction of Semyon Ivanovitch. "But why are you giving us such a talking to?" Stepan Nikiforovitch protested at last with an affable smile. "I must own, Ivan Ilyitch, I have not been able to make out so far what you are maintaining. You advocate humanity. That is, love of your fellow creatures, isn't it?" "Yes, if you like. Allow me. As far as I can see, that's not the only thing. Love of one's fellow creatures has always been fitting. The reform movement is not confined to that. All sorts of questions have arisen relating to the peasantry, the law courts, economics, government contracts, morals, and those questions are endless, and altogether may give rise to great upheavals, so to say. That is what we have been anxious about, and not simply humanity." "Yes, the thing is a bit deeper than that," observed Semyon Ivanovitch. "I quite understand, and allow me to observe, Semyon Ivanovitch, that I can't agree to being inferior to you in depth of understanding," Ivan Ilyitch observed sarcastically and with excessive sharpness. "However, I will make so bold as to assert, Stepan Nikiforovitch, that you have not understood me either." "No, I haven't." "And yet I maintain and everywhere advance the idea that humanity, and nothing else, with one's subordinates, from the official in one's department down to the copying clerk, from the copying clerk down to the house serf, from the servant down to the peasant, humanity, I say, may serve, so to speak, as the cornerstone of the coming reforms and the reformation of things in general. Why? Because, take a syllogism, I am human. Consequently, I am loved. I am loved, so confidence is felt in me. There is a feeling of confidence, and so there is trust. There is trust, and so there is love. That is, no, I mean to say that if they trust me, they will believe in the reforms. They will understand, so to speak, the essential nature of them, will, so to speak, embrace each other in a moral sense, and will settle the whole business in a friendly way, fundamentally. What are you laughing at, Semyon Ivanovitch? Can't you understand?" Stepan Nikiforovitch raised his eyebrows without speaking. He was surprised. "I fancy I have drunk a little too much," said Semyon Ivanovitch sarcastically, "and so I am a little slow of comprehension, not quite all my wits about me." Ivan Ilyitch winced. "We should break down," Stepan Nikiforovitch pronounced suddenly, after a slight pause of hesitation. "How do you mean we should break down?" asked Ivan Ilyitch, surprised at Stepan Nikiforovitch's abrupt remark. "Why, we should break under the strain." Stepan Nikiforovitch evidently did not care to explain further. "I suppose you are thinking of new wine in old bottles," Ivan Ilyitch replied, not without irony. "Well, I can answer for myself, anyway." At that moment the clock struck 11:30. "One sits on, but one must go at last," said Semyon Ivanovitch, getting up. But Ivan Ilyitch was before him. He got up from the table and took his sable cap from the chimney-piece. He looked as though he had been insulted. "So how is it to be, Semyon Ivanovitch? Will you think it over?" said Stepan Nikiforovitch as he saw the visitors out. "About the flat, you mean? I'll think it over. Well, when you have made up your mind, let me know as soon as possible." "Still on business?" Mr. Pralensky observed affably, in a slightly ingratiating tone, playing with his hat. It seemed to him as though they were forgetting him. Stepan Nikiforovitch raised his eyebrows and remained mute, as a sign that he would not detain his visitors. Semyon Ivanovitch made haste to bow himself out. "Well, after that, what is one to expect? If you don't understand the simple rules of good manners," Mr. Pralensky reflected to himself, and held out his hand to Stepan Nikiforovitch in a particularly off-hand way. In the hall, Ivan Ilyitch wrapped himself up in his light, expensive fur coat. He tried, for some reason, not to notice Semyon Ivanovitch's shabby raccoon, and they both began descending the stairs. "The old man seemed offended," said Ivan Ilyitch to the silent Semyon Ivanovitch. "No, why?" answered the latter with cool composure. "Servile flunkey," Ivan Ilyitch thought to himself. They went out at the front door. Semyon Ivanovitch's sledge with a grey, ugly horse drove up. "What the devil? What has Trifon done with my carriage?" cried Ivan Ilyitch, not seeing his carriage. The carriage was nowhere to be seen. Stepan Nikiforovitch's servant knew nothing about it. They appealed to Varlam, Semyon Ivanovitch's coachman, and received the answer that he had been standing there all the time, and that the carriage had been there, but now there was no sign of it. "An unpleasant predicament," Mr. Shipulenko pronounced. "Shall I take you home?" "Scoundrelly people!" Mr. Pralensky cried with fury. "He asked me, the rascal, to let him go to a wedding close here in the Petersburg side. Some crony of his was getting married, deuce take her. I sternly forbade him to absent himself, and now I'll bet he has gone off there." "He certainly has gone there, sir," observed Varlam, "but he promised to be back in a minute, to be here in time, that is." "Well, there it is. I had a presentiment that this would happen. I'll give it to him." "You'd better give him a good flogging once or twice at the police station. Then he will do what you tell him," said Semyon Ivanovitch as he wrapped the rug round him. "Please don't you trouble Semyon Ivanovitch." "Well, won't you let me take you along?" "Merci, bon voyage." Semyon Ivanovitch drove off, while Ivan Ilyitch set off on foot along the wooden pavement, conscious of a rather acute irritation. "Yes, indeed, I'll give it to you now, you rogue. I am going on foot on purpose to make you feel it, to frighten you. He will come back and hear that his master has gone off on foot, the blackguard." Ivan Ilyitch had never abused anyone like this, but he was greatly angered, and besides, there was a buzzing in his head. He was not given to drink, so 5 or 6 glasses soon affected him. But the night was enchanting. There was a frost, but it was remarkably still, and there was no wind. There was a clear, starry sky. The full moon was bathing the earth in a soft silver light. It was so lovely that after walking some 50 paces, Ivan Ilyitch almost forgot his troubles. He felt particularly pleased. People quickly change from one mood to another when they are a little drunk. He was even pleased with the ugly little wooden houses of the deserted street. "It's really a capital thing that I am walking," he thought. "It's a lesson to Trifon and a pleasure to me. I really ought to walk oftener. And I shall soon pick up a sledge on the Great Prospect. It's a glorious night. What little houses they all are! I suppose small fry live here, clerks, tradesmen, perhaps. That's Stepan Nikiforovitch. What reactionaries they all are, those old fogies. Fogies! Yes, c'est le mot. He is a sensible man, though. He has that bon sens, sober, practical understanding of things. But they are old. There is a lack of... what is it? There is a lack of something. We shall break down. What did he mean by that? He actually pondered when he said it. He didn't understand me a bit. And yet, how could he help understanding? It was more difficult not to understand it than to understand it. The chief thing is that I am convinced in my soul. Humanity, the love of one's kind, restore a man to himself, revive his personal dignity, and then, when the ground is prepared, get to work. I believe that's clear. Yes. Allow me, Your Excellency. Take a syllogism, for instance. We meet, for instance, a clerk, a poor downtrodden clerk. Well, who are you? Answer, a clerk. Very good, a clerk. Further, what sort of clerk are you? Answer, I am such and such a clerk, he says. Are you in the service? I am. Do you want to be happy? I do. What do you need for happiness? This and that. Why? Because, and there the man understands me with a couple of words. The man's mine. The man is caught, so to speak, in a net, and I can do what I like with him. That is for his good. Horrid man, that Semyon Ivanovitch. And what a nasty phiz he has. Flog him in the police station. He said that on purpose. No, you are talking rubbish. You can flog, but I'm not going to. I shall punish Trifon with words. I shall punish him with reproaches. He will feel it. As for flogging, it's an open question. What about going to Emerance? Oh, damnation take it, the cursed pavement, he cried out, suddenly tripping up. And this is the capital. Enlightenment! One might break one's leg. I detest that Semyon Ivanovitch, a most revolting phiz. He was chuckling at me just now when I said they would embrace each other in a moral sense. Well, and they will embrace each other. And what's that to do with you? I'm not going to embrace you. I'd rather embrace a peasant. If I meet a peasant, I shall talk to him. I was drunk, though, and perhaps did not express myself properly. Possibly I'm not expressing myself rightly now. I shall never touch wine again. In the evening you babble, and next morning you are sorry for it. After all, I am walking quite steadily, but they are all scoundrels anyhow. So Ivan Ilyitch meditated incoherently and by snatches as he went on striding along the pavement. The fresh air began to affect him, set his mind working. 5 minutes later he would have felt soothed and sleepy, but all at once, scarcely 2 paces from the Great Prospect, he heard music. He looked round. On the other side of the street, in a very tumble-down-looking long wooden house of 1 story, there was a great fête. There was the scraping of violins, and the droning of a double bass, and the squeaky tooting of a flute playing a very gay quadrille tune. Under the window stood an audience, mainly of women in wadded pelisses with kerchiefs on their heads. They were straining every effort to see something through a crack in the shutters. Evidently there was a gay party within. The sound of the thud of dancing feet reached the other side of the street. Ivan Ilyitch saw a policeman standing not far off and went up to him. "Whose house is that, brother?" he asked, flinging his expensive fur coat open just far enough to allow the policeman to see the imposing decoration on his breast. "It belongs to the registration clerk, Pseldonimov," answered the policeman, drawing himself up instantly, discerning the decoration. "Pseldonimov? Bah! Pseldonimov? What is he up to? Getting married?" "Yes, your honor, to a daughter of a titular councillor, Mlekopitaev, a titular councillor, used to serve in the municipal department. That house goes with the bride." "So that now the house is Pseldonimov's and not Mlekopitaev's?" "Yes, Pseldonimov's, your honor. It was Mlekopitaev's, but now it is Pseldonimov's." I am asking you, my man, because I am his chief. I am a general in the same office in which Pseldonimov serves." "Just so, your excellency." The policeman drew himself up more stiffly than ever, while Ivan Ilyitch seemed to ponder. He stood still and meditated. Yes, Pseldonimov really was in his department and in his own office. He remembered that. He was a little clerk with a salary of 10 roubles a month. As Mr. Pralinsky had received his department very lately, he might not have remembered precisely all his subordinates, but Pseldonimov he remembered just because of his surname. It had caught his eye from the very first, so that at the time he had had the curiosity to look with special attention at the possessor of such a surname. He remembered now a very young man with a long hooked nose, with tufts of flaxen hair, lean and ill-nourished, in an impossible uniform, and with unmentionables so impossible as to be actually unseemly. He remembered how the thought had flashed through his mind at the time. Shouldn't he give the poor fellow 10 roubles for Christmas to spend on his wardrobe? But as the poor fellow's face was too austere and his expression extremely unprepossessing, even exciting repulsion, the good-natured idea somehow faded away of itself, so Pseldonimov did not get his tip. He had been the more surprised when this same Pseldonimov had, not more than a week before, asked for leave to be married. Ivan Ilyitch remembered that he had somehow not had time to go into the matter, so that the matter of the marriage had been settled offhand, in haste. But yet he did remember exactly that Pseldonimov was receiving a wooden house and 400 roubles in cash as dowry with his bride. The circumstance had surprised him at the time. He remembered that he had made a slight jest over the juxtaposition of the names Pseldonimov and Mlekopitaev. He remembered all that clearly. He recalled it and grew more and more pensive. It is well known that whole trains of thought sometimes pass through our brains instantaneously, as though they were sensations without being translated into human speech, still less into literary language. But we will try to translate these sensations of our heroes, and present to the reader at least the kernel of them, so to say, what was most essential and nearest to reality in them. For many of our sensations, when translated into ordinary language, seem absolutely unreal. That is why they never find expression, though everyone has them. Of course, Ivan Ilyitch's sensations and thoughts were a little incoherent, but you know the reason. Why, flashed through his mind, here we all talk and talk, but when it comes to action it all ends in nothing. Here, for instance, take this Pseldonimov. He has just come from his wedding full of hope and excitement, looking forward to his wedding feast. This is one of the most blissful days of his life. Now he is busy with his guests, is giving a banquet, a modest one, poor but gay and full of genuine gladness. What if he knew that at this very moment I, his superior, his chief, am standing by his house listening to the music? Yes, really, how would he feel? No, what would he feel if I suddenly walked in? Of course, at first he would be frightened, he would be dumb with embarrassment. I should be in his way, and perhaps should upset everything. Yes, that would be so if any other general went in, but not I. That's a fact. Anyone else, but not I. Yes, Stepan Nikiforovitch, you did not understand me just now, but here is an example ready for you. Yes, we all make an outcry about acting humanely, but we are not capable of heroism, of fine actions. What sort of heroism? This sort. Consider, in the existing relations of the various members of society, for me, after midnight to go in to the wedding of my subordinate, a registration clerk, at 10 roubles the month, why, it would mean embarrassment, a revolution, the last days of Pompeii, a nonsensical folly. No one would understand it. Stepan Nikiforovitch would die before he understood it. Why, he said we should break down. Yes, but that's you, old people, inert, paralytic people. But I shan't break down. I will transform the last day of Pompeii to a day of the utmost sweetness for my subordinate, and a wild action to an action normal, patriarchal, lofty, and moral. How? Like this. Kindly listen. Here, I go in, suppose. They are amazed, leave off dancing, look wildly at me, draw back. Quite so, but at once I speak out. I go straight up to the frightened Pseldonimov, and with a most cordial, affable smile, in the simplest words, I say, "This is how it is. I have been at His Excellency Stepan Nikiforovitch's, and I expect you know, close here in the neighbourhood. Well then, lightly, in a laughing way, I shall tell him of my adventure with Trifon. From Trifon I shall pass on to saying how I walked here on foot. Well, I heard music, I inquired of a policeman, and learned, brother, that it was your wedding. Let me go in, I thought, to my subordinates. Let me see how my clerks enjoy themselves, and celebrate their wedding. I suppose you won't turn me out?" Turn me out? What a word for a subordinate! How the devil could he dream of turning me out? I fancy that he would be half crazy, that he would rush headlong to seat me in an armchair, would be trembling with delight, would hardly know what he was doing for the first minute. Why, what can be simpler, more elegant than such an action? Why did I go in? That's another question. That is, so to say, the moral aspect of the question. That's the pith. What was I thinking about? Yes. Well, of course they will make me sit down with the most important guest, some titular councillor or a relation who's a retired captain with a red nose. Gogol describes these eccentrics so capitally. Well, I shall make acquaintance, of course, with the bride. I shall compliment her. I shall encourage the guests. I shall beg them not to stand on ceremony, to enjoy themselves, to go on dancing. I shall make jokes. I shall laugh. In fact, I shall be affable and charming. I am always affable and charming when I am pleased with myself. The point is that I believe I am still a little, well, not drunk exactly, but... Of course, as a gentleman, I shall be quite on an equality with them, and shall not expect any especial marks of... But morally, it is a different matter. They will understand and appreciate it. My actions will evoke their nobler feelings. Well, I shall stay for half an hour, even for an hour. I shall leave, of course, before supper, but they will be bustling about, baking and roasting. They will be making low bows, but I will only drink a glass, congratulate them, and refuse supper. I shall say, business. And as soon as I pronounce the word business, all of them will at once have sternly respectful faces. By that I shall delicately remind them that there is a difference between them and me, the earth and the sky. It is not that I want to impress that on them, but it must be done. It's even essential in a moral sense when all is said and done. I shall smile at once, however, I shall even laugh, and then they will all pluck up courage again. I shall jest a little again with the bride. I may even hint that I shall come again in just 9 months to stand godfather, and she will be sure to be brought to bed by then. They multiply, you know, like rabbits. And they will all roar with laughter, and the bride will blush. I shall kiss her feelingly on the forehead, even give her my blessing, and next day my exploit will be known at the office. Next day I shall be stern again. Next day I shall be exacting again, even implacable. But they will all know what I am like. They will know my heart. They will know my essential nature. He is stern as chief, but as a man he is an angel. And I shall have conquered them. I shall have captured them by one little act which would never have entered your head. They would be mine. I should be their father. They would be my children. Come now, your Excellency Stepan Nikiforovitch, go and do likewise. But do you understand that Pseldonimov will tell his children how the general himself feasted and even drank at his wedding? Why, those children would tell their children, and those would tell their grandchildren as a most sacred story, that a grand gentleman, a statesman, and I shall be all that by then, did them the honor, and so on and so on. Why, I am morally elevating the humiliated. I restore him to himself. Why, he gets a salary of 10 roubles a month. If I repeat this 5 or 10 times, or something of the sort, I shall gain popularity all over the place. My name will be printed on the hearts of all, and the devil only knows what will come of that popularity. These, or something like these, were Ivan Ilyitch's reflections. A man says all sorts of things sometimes to himself, gentlemen, especially when he is in rather an eccentric condition. All these meditations passed through his mind in something like half a minute, and of course he might have confined himself to these dreams, and after mentally putting Stepan Nikiforovitch to shame, have gone very peacefully home and to bed. And he would have done well. But the trouble of it was that the moment was an eccentric one. As ill luck would have it, at that very instant the self-satisfied faces of Stepan Nikiforovitch and Semyon Ivanovitch suddenly rose before his heated imagination. "We shall break down," repeated Stepan Nikiforovitch, smiling disdainfully. Semyon Ivanovitch seconded him with his nastiest smile. "Well, we'll see whether we do break down," Ivan Ilyitch said resolutely, with a rush of heat to his face. He stepped down from the pavement, and with resolute steps went straight across the street towards the house of his registration clerk, Pseldonimov.